Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Davis, and I wanted to thank you all for joining us today for the Get Out and Vote, Empowering the Women's Vote webinar. I'm a former intern with the College of Arts and Letters. I graduated from Michigan State this past summer with degrees in global studies and political science, and I'll be the moderator for our discussion today. Before we begin, we'll be holding a Q&A closer to the end of the webinar, but if you have questions, you can push the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom. And if you happen to have any questions, feel free to ask them during, and I'll try and get the questions in. I'm excited to welcome Professors Kelly Salchow MacArthur, and she's a professor of graphic design here at MSU, and her research partner, Nancy Skolos, professor of graphic design at Rhode Island School of Design. I would like to give them the floor to introduce themselves and tell us more about their projects.
Thank you, Sarah. I am so happy to be here today and talking to my MSU community. As Sarah mentioned, I'm professor of graphic design. I'm in the Department of Art History, and Design, and I've been teaching at MSU for 16 years now. My focus is in environmental concepts and merging three-dimensionality with graphic design, surface, and text. And now I'll let Nancy do an intro on herself.
Yes, I just would like to repeat a big thank you for inviting us today, and it's really great to be here with Kelly. I'm a professor of graphic design at Rhode Island School of Design, and Kelly was a graduate student, and I've really enjoyed keeping track of her career over the past years and was so thrilled to be able to work with her on this project.
So I'm going to start today's webinar by sharing my screen. I hope everyone can see that. This is a project that Nancy and I have been working on for over 2 years. So it was conceived in 2018 when I started encountering articles noting that 2020 would be the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, granting women the vote. I was dreaming about what this project could be, and it seemed like it was a historic opportunity to unify and celebrate women of design while focusing their talents toward an important civic goal. And I knew I couldn't do this alone, and Nancy would be the perfect partner in this. I'm so grateful that she agreed to have this adventure with me. We developed a diverse list of invitees in an effort to highlight women who are actively contributing to society and the profession today. To support mentorship and inclusion, each invitee had the option to invite an additional designer to participate. So what this developed into was a national poster initiative where we invited women to design nonpartisan posters that would inspire voter participation. So women make up just over half of the population in this country. In 2016, just over 63% of women voted. We are so curious to see what that turnout will be in 2020. And it looks like, from all indications so far, that we are going to hit records in terms of voter participation in the 2020 election. We've probably all seen images like this. This is a suffragist parade in 1915 in New York City. About this time, women could not own property or sign a contract. A woman had no right to her wages, but her husband did. She had no custodial rights to her children. A woman could not have her name on a passport or serve on a jury. And she could be fired for being pregnant. That actually didn't change until 1978. What we see in this image is that the women were wearing white. This helped them stand out in a crowd of dark suits. They were using graphic communication way back then. And their color palette was purple, white, and yellow, which stood for loyalty, purity, and hope. They were determined to combat their critics' rumors that they were devilish Amazons set to destroy gender hierarchies. And they promised to bring skill and civility to politics and corruption. The 1848 Seneca Falls Convention is considered to have been the launch of the women's suffrage movement. The Declaration of Sentiments was written by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and modeled on the US Declaration of Independence. It stated, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal. They stated that men had established a system that destroys women's confidence and self-respect and places them in the role of dependence. On the right here, you can see a couple photos of seminal protests. The top is from 1911, which was a march for workers' rights following a factory fire, where over 100 women and girls were killed. They couldn't escape from the fire because they were locked in to ensure their productivity. The signs they hold state, "We condemn child labor, and do you want fire protection?" And below that is from the March on Washington in 1963. There were many civil rights marches in the 1950s and 60s to demand enfranchisement for all Black Americans. Their signs state, "We march for jobs for all, a decent pay for now, or a decent pay now, and we march for integrated schools now." This suffrage map from 1914 or 15 shows states slowly adopting the women's vote. In the white states, suffrage had already been granted. The gray states, it's partial suffrage, most likely just in presidential elections. In the Black states, no suffrage had been granted yet. It had been 42 years since the Women's Suffrage Amendment was first brought to Congress. And on August 18th, it was ratified to the US Constitution. The decision came down to one vote. After a plea from his mother, 24-year-old Congressman Harry Burns changed his vote to support suffrage. It reads, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex." Now, of course, at that time, many other countries had already granted women the right to vote, including Australia, Finland, Germany, Canada, Russia, and many others.
Graphic design has consistently been implemented as a powerful tool in politics, with poster design running parallel to activism and social change for over 100 years. This is the reason Kelly and I settled on the poster as a really interesting vehicle for this project. And we also partnered with the American Institute of Graphic Arts, who's been running a Get Out the Vote poster campaign. And that campaign was a great model and partner because it uses a poster as a consistent framework for laying out multiple narratives and approaches to the vote. And in addition, they have an online platform for sharing the posters with the public. The history and themes of suffrage began to really come to life as the posters came in from the designers. The poster on the left, where women could be mothers but not voting citizens, sort of foreshadows Karen Cheng's bold typographic poster on the right, where in contrast to a century ago, where she highlights the choices and roles women have today, with including voter and citizen in darker type at the bottom. Here again, history was embodied in this poster on the right by Shiraz Galoob that was inspired by civil rights activist Fannie Lou Hamer, pictured on the left, who was taken off a bus and arrested on her way back from a voter registration workshop, imprisoned and beaten. The beautifully typeset poster commemorates Hamer's graphic recounting of the incident that was part of her speech at the Democratic National Convention in 1964. On the left is a historic image of the banner and slogan of the National Association of Colored Women, founded in 1896 by Harriet Tubman, Ida B. Wells, and others to fight for equal rights, including the right to vote. Their motto, "Lifting as we climb," appeared on Renee Seward's poster right, where she pushes the word Black through the picture plane, honoring the Black women who continued to push past the barriers for 45 more years until the Civil Rights Act of 1965.
Part of the exhibition that is being shown is the timeline. So this was a big project in itself. We researched and I compiled and designed this timeline. The original title of our initiative was Celebrating 100 Years of the Women's Vote. But after colleagues' input, a lot of research and reflection, we recognized the complications and inequities that plagued women's suffrage. Empowering the women's vote is a much more apt title for both our history and our intentions. And this timeline helps delineate the prejudice, inequities, and the struggle that women's suffrage faced. In the zoomed view here, we can see that it's pretty extensive, and it doesn't just show legislation through this time, but also major historic events that were happening that would impact the fight for equality and the fight for voting rights. As Nancy mentioned, 1965 was absolutely pivotal. It finally brought the right to vote to all people. And something that I think is especially interesting in this timeline is that the first woman in a specific role is placed in purple, and you can hopefully make it out on your end, but there's a lot more purple as we go further through this timeline. It's of course a snapshot. There would be a lot to add to this timeline. I would also like to see where it goes from here. By the time our core group of posters had been collected, we had 65 posters from 71 women. This is really an amazing, exciting, diverse list of women that have come forward to contribute their passion and their efforts and their time for this collective civic project. And all of these posters are documented in the exhibition catalog, which is here designed as a newspaper format. The large scale was perfect for the large scale of the posters, and then the viewer of this catalog can see the beautiful detail in these posters. To date, we've distributed 800 of these. And here you can see it in its open version. On the back cover, I decided to place Frances Alana's poster, which so perfectly sums up this project and its point in history. A woman's work is never done. It seems like we've made some great progress, but we still have a lot more to make. The exhibition is currently being shown in 8 cities across the country. And as you can see from these images, a lot of these are being placed in a very public and easily accessible window space for anybody passing by to see. Because of COVID, a lot of these galleries and museums are not fully accessible to the public, but thankfully our designers and our partners on this have found creative ways to still make it usable by the public.
As you can see from those wonderful gallery photos, each poster had a really distinctive approach, but there were thematic threads among them. These 2 posters bring forward the history through incorporating kind of vintage imagery. The poster on the left, in the poster on the left, Meredith Davis features Victoria Claflin Woodhull, who ran for president in 1872, 48 years before women gained the right to vote. On the right, Bonnie Siegler pairs a vintage image with the message, "Women fought for the right to vote, now use it," saying in her design statement, "The heroic women who fought for the 19th Amendment would have never imagined that after finally getting the right to vote, only about 60% of eligible women would use it. I want the other 40% to vote this time too." These 2 posters bring it forward to the next generation. On the left, Laurel Shoemaker's poster advocates for the voices of future generations with this photo of a joyous and vocal young girl. And Emily Comfort carves a path of type through the fight and the rights that says, "Remember the fight of our mothers and protect the rights of our daughters." There were a lot of, I thought these 2 were particularly powerful just because they used factual data. On the left, Rebecca Techtmeyer displays the percentages of women who voted in the presidential elections compared to men from the years 1964 to now, aligned with the percentages of women in Congress compared to men. Women on the left, men on the right. And then on the right, Change the Math by Alicia Cheng can contrast the ratio of women to men in the population with the ratio of women to men in the House, Senate, and as president. And collective voices are the theme in these 2 posters. The one on the left by Terry Irwin, sort of homage to Elizabeth Warren and the persistence of women's voices throughout history. She lists the contributions of 108 women from 1776 until today who have continued to persist for women's rights. Quotes include Harriet Tubman, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Geraldine Ferraro, and Michelle Obama. And on the right, the poster by Jenny Alshami also pays homage to visionary women, both historic and contemporary, by featuring the words of Coretta Scott King, Gloria Steinem, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and others. These are a lot about the power of women to change things by voting. Nested Aphorisms is the title of the poster on the left, where Audrey Bennett paraphrases Angela Davis's famous quote. And the poster on the right by Shanti Sparrow, Women Decide, visually celebrates the collective momentum of the women's vote, that when women turn out in higher rates than men. Some of the posters were more lighthearted. These two are interesting. You know, the one on the left, very simply, you know, the designer Louise Sandhouse says, "I wanted to use beauty as a means to draw people to the message and inspire voting." Flowers not only represent beauty, but women and the feminine as well, and they come in many colors. And on the right, April Greiman and Lori Haycock Bacala, "Voting is sexy. We are passionate about the upcoming election and the energy behind this initiative. Why is voting sexy? Because we can, and it's going to feel great."
A lot of the posters were very illustrative. On the left here, we see Kalina Sale's contribution that she titled Voice of Change. About this poster, she wrote, "In November, the mothers, sisters, and daughters who have wept over the unjust loss of loved ones will have their voices heard. For everyone who has ever been silenced by racist systems and have been oppressed by inequality, their voices will carry power and purpose, honoring those who came before and empowering those who are here today." And that very personal and reflective approach that Kalina took is in contrast to Takeo Moroga Fredericks on the right, which is a very communal, jovial, active graphic illustration. Here, two posters that are quite emotive in different ways again. Rebecca Mendez on the left uses a singular photo of the outer body while sharing inner thoughts. Over this image, she lays a text from Dana Ramey Berry, which states, "During this moment, I feel that we still need to be emancipated. There are still freedoms that need to be protected. There are still laws that need to be revised. There are more people that need to be included. There are more things to achieve. This is more space for change and growth." And Anna Laurent has titled her poster, "Your Voice Decides." And she writes that Latinas, whatever your perspective in this election, your voice decides. Vote. And as we have a few more images here to share, because Nancy and I are both designers, we agreed that we should both be allowed to contribute a poster of our own to the collection. On the left, you see sketches that I had done not only for my individual poster, but also for the work, the design pieces that became part of this initiative, including the identity that Nancy and I worked on together, as well as the catalog and the timeline. So the first challenge for me personally was to actually separate these two concepts, or these two kind of bodies of sketches, and figure out how to find my own voice for my own poster. I kept coming back to the equal sign. It seemed like, as I had done all of this research and really had thought about the timeline, that all of this progress and all of this pushing is for the sake of being considered an equal to everyone else in the society, in our community. So I kept coming back to the equal sign. Then I realized that if I juxtapose the equal sign, I could make a kind of tapestry. So I took a bunch of photos of a map that I wove, or a mat that I wove out of paper strips. And combining these on screen, I was grappling with what text would make sense with the imagery. I really liked the her voice equals her vote concept, but I ended up with this as my final poster. Hopefully it demonstrates metaphorically what I was trying to achieve. And I really was focusing on this idea that the moment we each vote, we are absolutely equal. It is a moment of equalization. As long as our ballot is cast and counted, we are equals in that moment.
And my concept was to contrast something discarded, the woman's voice, with something amplified. So I started with the idea of splitting the poster in half, with one half being almost like a Kleenex with lipstick, representing the objectified woman being thrown away, and then on the other side being amplified through this megaphone voice. And gradually I just focused on the megaphone because it seemed a lot clearer. So I just did many iterations to try to get the gesture of just this wonderful voice that was finally able to cast a vote.
Okay, and I'll stop sharing my screen at this point, and we can go back to Sarah and the group.
Yes, thank you so much. That was so informative. I'm so happy I got to hear you guys speak today. We have some questions that have been asked already, so I thought I would throw them out for you guys right now. Is that okay?
Sure.
Yeah, so first question could be, in an increasingly digital world, how have you seen the practice of activism through graphic art change? And a second question you can answer after is, what do you anticipate the future holds?
Those are great questions. You know, everything seems to be even more digitized these days with COVID, and all of our lives have been affected. I think Nancy and I are both grateful that we do have these digital tools to help disseminate this message, even though we're faced with a lot of limitations in terms of travel and interactions, you know, physical interactions with our friends and our peers and our colleagues and the public. So we've been really active in sharing this project as much as possible through all of our social media channels and through webinars. And it almost seems like perfect timing that we have these tools at our fingertips. And I'll let Nancy, if you have anything to add, please do.
Well, I think we've all noticed how much is going on social media around the election, and there's kind of good sides and bad sides to that. But definitely, the digital era has totally changed graphic design and the way that we can communicate information. Yeah.
Thank you so much for those thorough responses. There's another similar question, but I think it hits on different topics. Have you noticed a change in design approach in thinking as the pandemic has shifted most design into a digital space? And how can print design find its place in a socially distant digital age?
I think that we were lucky with this project because we always had it planned to be a print-on-demand project. So we had a Dropbox with the posters at really large scale. So all the 10 exhibitions we've had, the galleries have been able to just print them themselves. So I think that was in terms of this project, but the whole issue of printing, I've noticed as a teacher, has been really challenging. And just to try to make the most of just using digital tools for now. I don't know, Kelly, what would you say?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it was interesting, Nancy, we've had so many conversations through this project. We've spent hours and hours and hours brainstorming and going back and forth in terms of the decisions that we had to make along the way. And one of those early on was, if the form of this interaction and collaboration should even be a poster. And we recognize that a poster has been such a part of history, as you mentioned in our, earlier in our presentation. But I think we see text and image on a paper format very regularly, with all of the demonstrations and the social activism that we are in the midst of. Those are always full of signs and posters. And I love seeing all of the engagement that is evident just in all the yard signs right now because of the election coming up. I think it's helped to solidify our decision or kind of support our decision to go with posters. They're always, and the printed form is very accessible. It's not necessary to have an electric device, to see these things out on the sidewalks or on the wall of a building or stapled to a signpost. All of these places are are areas where people can very quickly, very easily get their ideas out. And so it has seemed like a perfect format.
Thank you. We have some questions in the Q&A chat and some comments. Jacqueline commented that they love your equal and megaphone poster designs, and thanks you both for presenting today. And another question is, how important do you think it is to use your right to vote and inform the younger generation to do so also? And I think that's such an interesting question, especially while answering questions about activism right now.
Yes, I think it's so important. I feel like we're at a moment right now where society is engaged. And as we're hearing in the news, you know, the voter turnout being at a higher pace than it has been, they're projecting that it's going to be a higher turnout that we've had ever since 1908, I think was the last I heard. That is so exciting because I think we all have opinions and we all want to be heard. And through the elections is how we make our voices heard. I also think that college campuses are the perfect place to have these informed, active, divergent conversations. Being a part of a community where we can talk about difficult subjects and respect each other's opinions is really important. And I think there's no better place for that to happen than a college campus.
I totally second everything Kelly said.
Thank you. There's Christy Wise asked, have you thought about letting people purchase and then print posters on demand for themselves to hang in their personal spaces?
They can do this for free, so please do. Something that's really exciting about this initiative, and Nancy touched on this, is that because of our partnership with AIGA, the Professional Association for Design, these posters are available for free download and printing and distribution on aiga.org/vote. Now, the initiative that we showed you today and that we've talked about primarily was the core collection. So these were invited designers. AIGA members have been invited to further contribute to the collection. And last I checked, there were over 150 Empowering the Women's Vote posters on the AIGA site. So that's an indication of participation as well and engagement. And I think it's so exciting and so invigorating to see that designers and non-designers are really a part of this process.
Nice. Are you seeing an increase in interest in graphic design careers from students compared to previous years now?
It's hard to quantify it on just a 1 year at a time basis, but I feel like over the course of the past 5 to 10 years, we're getting more interest in Rhode Island School of Design. There are more students that are entering graphic design, and most of the reason that they are is because they do want to make a difference with it. They want to use it as a tool to better society, and I feel like it's really changed the way that we teach too. We really teach about ideas and strategies around those types of things.
Agreed. I'm seeing that here at MSU as well. And it's a very popular major. It's an exciting one to think that you can enter a creative discipline and be challenged with new problem statements and criteria every day, new clients that you're working for, and new concepts that you need to figure out how to translate into visual communication and then share with the public. So Nancy's right. It's really, it's a powerful discipline in terms of sharing your message. And I think as we're seeing across the board that society is getting more visual all the time. We're always we're communicating through icons. yeah, there's no shortage of visual communication in our daily routines, that's for sure.
And similarly, talking about students, do you guys know specifically at your institutions or within graphic design altogether, the ratio of male to female students seeking degrees in graphic design? And is there an increase in women in the graphic design field?
I'll let Nancy field this because she's been teaching longer than I have.
Well, from what I can remember, it's almost always been a majority women kind of major. Like, I would say, you know, even art school in general is like 70% women. I might be wrong about this, but yeah, that's why it's so amazing that still today in the field of graphic design, only until recently, the men dominated it completely, even though we're educating so many women. So that's always kind of puzzled me that there aren't more women, you know, sort of driving graphic design. And I think they are now, you know, really having almost like an equal voice, but it took a long time.
I hope so. I found the same also in my classes, that it's primarily, majority women for the most part. There have been a few years where there will just be one male student in the class, and that seems especially concrete, you know, in terms of what the ratio breakdown is. But I've also observed that in the design history a lot of times, and when I was educated many years back in design history, that there were not many women represented, and there definitely were not many designers of color. And I'm hoping, and we're seeing evidence of this, that's now shifting. And I think that will only support more diversity in the field as we move forward. You know, I think that's something that this project hopes to affect by focusing on women in design. We thought that we consciously gave voice to perhaps a group that has not been given the spotlight as much as they deserve. And we also were very aware of creating a list of invitees that was more diverse than what may be represented in the field hierarchies. So we're trying to be proactive through this project in as many ways as possible.
And there's a great question about that in the chat, actually, from Hallie, asking, how do we make sure these posters and messages are seen by those who need the encouragement and who need to see them? The digital world is so large. How do you go about trying to reach everyone? And another question I have is, do you have a very specific target audience that you're trying to reach?
I guess my target audience would be anyone who's on the fence about voting, anyone who doesn't think that their vote matters, that it's worth the effort or the time, or, you know, that it would really sway one way or the other. Because of course, if enough people feel that way, then that collective voice is not heard. And I think that the passion and the diversity in this poster collection means that there's more of an opportunity for any one of those posters to speak directly to one of those people who is on the fence. That's my hope.
Thank you so much. Someone else asked, do you feel that the majority of students are women because women are typically stereotyped as being well equipped for the arts and humanities, while men are often the ones who should pursue STEM?
I wish I knew more about this, but that sounds like a pretty logical assumption. That it's sort of a stereotype that, but I don't know. I don't really think it's probably that simple. I think a lot of it happens as women go out into the career world. They have so many other responsibilities that they're, you know, still is difficult to juggle everything. And I feel like that's that's one thing that kind of came up in the poster that Karen Chang did that we showed in the beginning with all the roles women play. I mean, she was trying to say, yeah, now we have all this, but how do we manage it all? And I think that's still a core issue.
Thank you so much. I think things are dense, subjects are more dense than we think sometimes, and it's hard to ask a blanket question and have an answer. I have another question I think is more for Kelly, but it says Susan Metro said that they were a professor at MSU graphic design from 1980 to 84, and wanted to know what other than technology has changed in the program.
Boy. I think it's a really exciting program to be a part of. Of course, since that time, there have been a lot of new hires. So there's different personalities in Kresge Art Center. We're still in Kresge Art Center. And we're still looking out at the Red Cedar River there. But I think we still start with the fundamentals in terms of design education. And now there's, as the discipline evolves and grows, there's more things that we need to touch on in education. So, for instance, a student may be especially interested in interaction design or motion, or I teach a spatial design class. And those are classes that wouldn't have been around in the 80s. When I was in undergrad, I was one in the class at the University of Cincinnati that had the first computer graphics class. And there was one computer lab, and we each got to use that computer lab for the designated class time. And there were 2 printers, and a color print cost $20. And that was just an 8.5 by 11 print, so things have surely come a long way. Students now, they're still working on the tabletops in the studio classes, but they also have their own laptops, and they can go work at a coffee house or in their own living room. And so there's, I think we're trying to find ways to create community when we are in the studio together. That's something that's also been a challenge as we're working online with COVID, but the more face-to-face, the interactions we have, even if it's through the screen, I think the more connections we can establish.
Another question just came in. It says, as educators, how do you prepare students, not only for careers as professional practitioners, but also with heightened understanding of design as a social practice?
You touched on this, Nancy. Do you want to take this one?
Well, we just recently shifted our core studios to be a lot more open in that way. Just sort of series of kind of questions that the students are asked about the world that sort of progress through the sophomore year into the end of the junior year. They'll observe a lot of things, like they'll curate collections of things off the internet, and then they'll figure out how that affects people's perception. So they do a lot of investigating, and then they also think of a lot of ways to mediate, between a social problem and some sort of graphic way of solving it. So it has totally changed, because like I said before, because that's why the students are coming into graphic design for the most part. We've really had to learn a lot about that, and also cultivate new faculty who are really interested in that, in different ways that design can be in the world.
Thank you so much. Another question could be, did you know politics was something you would want to use for your design background?
I've been focusing on environmentalism over the past 15 years in my work. it's kind of a luxury as an academic to choose the topics that I want to deal with, as opposed to if I were primarily a practitioner, I would be working with the topics that the clients would bring to me. And of course, I still do some of that, but most of my work is in creative research. And so the focus that I've really been very engaged with is environmentalism, because I feel like that's an imperative and long-term consideration and overarching concern that we all need to be aware of. But I completely see this tied to politics. So, you know, the United States participation in the Paris Climate Agreement would be a great thing to be a part of. I think at this point, dividing or separating environmental consideration and activism from politics isn't a possibility in the current climate. And considering that, politics has pulled me into it just naturally. I think my work always tries to respond to the current dialogue and what's happening socially. And this was a hard tug over the past few years towards generating this initiative that Nancy and I have been working on.
Thank you so much for that great, thorough answer. Watching the clock, this is going to be our last question. For those of you who would like to stick around when we stop recording, you can access and turn on your microphone or camera, and you're welcome to stick around and talk more with us after. I know I have a specific question, especially concerning your how environmentalism just became very intertwined with politics and how this project came about. And have you guys been able to see your works, like the installations, anywhere, or has it only been through pictures that you guys have been able to see it out? Also, for Dr. Skolos, are you also environmentally tied to your art, or have you been using art and politics in the past, either in your classes or in your own personal work?
I think that I'm not really as focused on these types of issues normally. You know, being from a bit older generation, I'm pretty rooted in kind of ideals of like design and as an end in itself. And, you know, I think that one of the real pioneers of getting designers to wake up was Sheila DeBrettville. You know, the work that she started to do way back in the 70s, really questioning why we're doing design. And I think that I was exposed to her in the early 90s when she started teaching at Yale, and I was teaching some workshops there, and I got really interested in trying to make my work more meaningful that way. Also, Emory Douglas came to RISD 4 years ago and gave a lecture that just like was so incredible. And, you know, he's been doing that type of work since the 60s. And so, but, you know, just to be honest, it isn't really my specialty. I'm hoping maybe this will get me more sort of into that direction.
You know, to answer the first part of that question, I meant to mention, and I'm glad that you prompted this, Sarah, that the exhibition is currently on view at the MSU Union Art Gallery. And this Friday it opens at Scene Metro Space in downtown East Lansing. Because the collection is so large, the posters some are at the Union and some will be at Scene. And I've also seen the show as it's been mounted in Ann Arbor at the University of Michigan Stamps Gallery. And RISD, so Nancy, RISD has one at the RISD.
Yeah, I haven't been in there though. I haven't seen it. But I have been to school, but I haven't gone into the Chase Center to see that. But I'll promise that I'll look at it soon. They only installed one wall of them because because of COVID, their plans kind of got a little bit cut off a little bit.
Thank you both so much for speaking about your project today and your research. I'm sure we're all very thankful and appreciate you being here. We're obviously going to stick around if anybody wants to talk later, but we're about to stop recording. And we'll be here to answer any more questions.
Thank you, Sarah. It's been a pleasure.